Morning everyone. I was lost when I left school, didn't know what I wanted to do, and walked into an Air Force recruiting office one day. Managed to get offered a job, ended up becoming a navigator. And what does a navigator do in the Air Force? Well, in my instance, I ran the back end of an Orion, a submarine hunting aircraft with a crew of about 10 people on board. And the analogies of what that Orion does is quite similar to what we saw out on the farms yesterday. It's got a whole bunch of sensors on board. It all gets collated together on what was then a Commodore 64 equivalent computer. And then my job was to analyse all of the inputs, make decisions and correct what the aircraft was doing. So that was all done at 300 feet over the water at night, doing 300 to 400 kilometres an hour, hunting a submarine that was trying to evade us in the depths underneath. So we had acoustic processors, radars, infrared cameras, magnetic detectors, optical devices, and all these human beings were feeding the data in. And that led me to become fascinated with data and how it can influence decision making. I did that for about 15 years, and it was the world's best job. Like Peter Pan, I never wanted to grow up. I then moved on and moved into the commercial world, where I ran a Customs Border Protection contract, QantasLink, and again, data and analytics were a key part of my role. I ended up being Vice President of Operations globally with a fleet of 140 aircraft, 2,200 employees, and I could walk into our operations centre with a suite of dashboards across the top wall with about 50 staff in there coordinating activities, and I could see what every aircraft was doing, and we could measure the performance of every pilot, flight attendant and observer for every minute of the day. We knew exactly what they were doing, where they were at, and we could process engineer systems improvements so that the organisation could improve. So about 3 years ago, I decided to take a leap of faith and a tree change or a sea change or whatever you want to call it. And I moved down to Wattle Range, just across the border in South Australia, to the town of Millicent, and picked up the role as CEO. As with every job opportunity that's offered to you, you don't really know what you're walking into. The organisation never really declares what their problems are when you apply for the job. So on day one, I started sitting down with all the staff and asking what they did, and I've got no local government background, so I had both ears wide open. And all I saw were manila folders full of paper getting put in compactuses. So I've come from a digital industry to an analogue one. Then started to explore what systems we have in place, and Wattle Range, like about half of the South Australian councils, uses a system called SynergySoft. And I found we couldn't even extract financial reporting data out of the system. Couldn't even get a profit and loss statement out of it. We had no HR systems. I couldn't measure what any of our staff were doing. Capital projects were a mystery. All I knew is every time somebody would manually produce a capital projects report for council, all we did was measure financial expenditure. That was it, which lagged by about 3 months. So over the last 3 years, I've tried to influence change within the organisation, and change takes time. People have to first of all understand why you have a need for change. And so that was a very carefully crafted series of sessions where we'd have a problem and I'd sit down and much like you were saying, we'd process engineer what went wrong. And then there'd be that light bulb moment where one of the staff would realise there's a better way of doing things. I'll activate that in a minute once I get to some of the solutions we put in place. The first one was a question that we got in the council chamber. We'd been asked to spend $50,000 upgrading the kitchen of our RSL hall. And one of the councillors said, "How often do we use the kitchen?" Big blank. So the next day I walked in and spoke to our customer service team and I said, "Tell me, how do they book the halls?" And it was a sheet of paper that was printed off and handed to somebody over the counter, and they filled it in with a biro, and then it got put onto one of those manila folders and put back into the compactus again. And so we then spent the next hour going through that manila folder, and we found out that the RSL hall kitchen had been used 3 times in the previous 18 months. So I had information I could now present back to council on deciding whether or not we should spend $50,000 on the upgrade. They elected to spend 15. Pretty simple example. I then went back to the customer service desk and said, wouldn't it be easier if we put this into a database? And instead of handwriting it, just type it in? And if I was able to help you create that database with you, right, so you get to design it, so it automatically fills in the date and the time and gives you drop-down lists and simple buttons you can click for choices, it'll make your job easier. Some nodding, some apprehension, but nodding. So we mucked around for a month or two and we designed that interface and they started using it. And lo and behold, we started capturing data that we could make better decisions with. But I had an ulterior motive. What I wanted to do with that data is then display it back to the organisation in a format that was digestible. Then we went to the Visitor Information Centre. We've got 3 VICs in Wattle Range, and all the staff were meticulously, every time a visitor came in, they would handwrite how many people were in the group and how many days they were here for and what the primary purpose of their visit was about. Does it sound familiar? And then at the end of the month, they would manually tally up those columns and they would send an email off to the SA Tourism Commission and say, this is how many people we've had through our VICs. And the data just disappeared into a black hole. So we sat down with them and we created another little database. We got them to type it in instead of jotting it down. And we then produced some analytics and displays coming back out the other end. And this went on. And I realised pretty quickly we needed to have a little bit of a systemic approach about how we were going to handle this. We had archaic systems that couldn't capture this data. We needed something simple that the staff could deploy themselves. And we went to Microsoft SharePoint. We'd just migrated to Office 365. It was all an integrated platform. For $9 a month per user, we were able to plug this capability into the organisation. Then we just used Microsoft Power BI to display the data out the other end. Again, another $9 a month subscription to those of us that were using it. And gradually, over the course of the last couple of years, we've developed a suite of applications that allow us to make informed decisions in real time. And it's amazing how often I'll get a question in a council meeting, right, and we'll go just to this simple little system and we'll have the answer in about 30 seconds. So if I can wake this up, needs facial recognition. This is the simple little launch page. It's web-based, cloud-based, accessible anywhere in the world, including here. So we're online right now. I've got a series of menus and applications broken down by department under corporate services. They're all the apps we've developed just for that one department. So every media release that goes out has an authorisation process and a workflow behind it. The Mayor and I co-sign and it won't get released until that process is complete. Communiques all of our internal communications to elected members. Any staff member, it's just a little blog. And that blog sends them an email because our elected members won't pull information off the system. It needs to be pushed to them. The Facilities Hire app that you can see up there in the middle, that's the one that tracks the RSL Hall kitchen utilisation. And the list goes on. We've got all of our strategic planning actions in there linked to individual staff members with dates and times that they need to have that task completed by and a budget allocation assigned to it. Each staff member can go into that list and look at my projects and it's got all the things they need to do in the next 5 years for our strategic planning process. All of our projects are listed in there in exactly the same way. So every staff member knows what's been assigned to them, what the budget is they've got to spend, when the expected timelines are, and they go in and they individually update the status. So all of this is in absence of a corporate system that was allowing us to capture and use data in a meaningful way. There's probably about 60 little apps in there that we've developed, and we've developed them with the staff that are responsible for rolling it out. And I think that's the key. Your staff know what the problems are. Their ideas are locked in their heads. It's not necessarily a developer who's going to come in and act as a consultant and solve your problems for you, because the developer has no idea how local government works. So if you can empower your staff to problem solve and then use digital technology to help them process engineer a better way of doing it, I expect that this has probably cost us less than $5,000 a year to implement. All right? It's a pretty amazing bang for buck. And the money we have saved in decision making, making better decisions, would be 100-fold. So that's the input, and every one of those has a lot more detail running down through it. So that's the basic list, and hopefully this will work. You select each one of those and it should bring up all the detail. So it's a simple drill down from anywhere. Where the real rubber hits the road though is in the Power BI area. So these are the suite of dashboards that we've produced. Again, accessible to elected members, to all staff. You can publish these to the World Wide Web and share them with anyone you want to. There's one in here that was quite confronting to all 68 South Australian Council CEOs. South Australia's been talking about benchmarking ever since I've been here, and very little's being done about it. I got so sick and tired of listening to the word benchmarking and nothing happening, I grabbed all the Grants Commission data from the state government website, downloaded it, and looked at 25 KPIs and broke them out by council. I compared CEO salary packages to the number of Section 27 complaints received. All sorts of interesting metrics about how organisations were performing. Pushed it up in front of a CEO's forum in Adelaide. About 10% of those in the room gasped and hid. The other 90% couldn't wait to get their hands on the data and do something productive with it. And it's all interactive. So a couple of examples. There's the Visitor Information Centre data. What you're looking at there is an interactive dashboard. By selecting from the top right-hand triangle, I can have a look at visitor information rates from Beachport, one of our coastal towns. Deselect it and look at the data from just 1 month, or deselect that one calendar month, and you will see those concentric circles building as the data is updating. So it's live and interactive. What this tells us is a number of insightful things that we couldn't see before. Remember, we were handwriting this down, tallying it once a month and sending it to SA Tourism Commission and getting nothing back out of them. What we now know is most of our tourism comes from Western Victoria. It allows us to target our marketing, which we're about to embark on, a marketing campaign, to those areas that we're going to get the best value for money. It also shows us, everyone's been talking about the Chinese tourism economy and everyone get ready for it. We're seeing almost no Chinese tourism coming through to Wattle Range, and that sparked a question. Why? We've been to China twice, right? We've invested a lot of time and money trying to figure out how we can tap into that Chinese market. What the data shows us is they're not coming, despite our best efforts. And then the penny dropped. When Chinese people come on holiday, they get a maximum of 1 week off. They don't get paid. When you've got 2 days of travel either end, you've got a 5-day window in country. You're not going to spend one of those days driving 5 hours to Wattle Range. They're never coming. So it allowed us to change our tourism marketing focus away from that. And what the statistics tell us is that the international tourism is led by the UK, followed by Europe, where we couldn't pick the accent when they came through the door, Germany, France, New Zealand, and then China, with the US coming from just behind. So it's that European market that we need to focus our attention on. A couple of other insightful little things that just this simple little exercise showed us is that Around about 30% of our visitors visit the Visitor Information Centre to get access to our museums. We've got one of the best horse-drawn vehicle museums in the country sitting in Millicent. And this data starts to back up how much of a draw card that particular facility is to our community and an opportunity to further invest in it. We've also got one in Beachport, right? So all of that data helps you with your decision making on where to invest your tourism dollars. The other thing it showed us is 10% of them, and predominantly the Europeans, are coming in to get a simple internet connection. So we're now putting Wi-Fi down the main streets of our 3 major towns. Because when they come into town, we don't want them to sit in the VIC, we want them to sit in our coffee shops and our bakeries and all those other areas and invest their tourism dollars. For those of you that visited the sale yards yesterday, we have a very different story. We lost our sheep about 7 years ago, and our cattle sales have declined from about 35,000 head per year down to about 8,000. No one was monitoring. No one was looking at the sliding downfall. Intrinsically, our sale yard manager knew something was going horribly wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on it. We just plugged this into the sale yards database and showed the data in a way that was meaningful. The graph on the left-hand side, you can see the seasonal effect from winter through to summer. What's quite concerning is that downward sliding trend is about an 8% degradation per annum. It allowed us to forecast where we're actually going to get to a point where it's no longer sustainable. We announced 3 months ago that we were going to close the sale yards in June 2020 when it's at its lowest ebb in the seasonal cycle to allow all the buyers, agents and farmers to adjust, and then we called a public meeting to consult with the community. I had 250 angry farmers with pitchforks in a room of about this size, and they were spilling out the front. I was able to show them this data and say it's actually got nothing to do with cost. We lose about 150,000 a year at the sale yards. It doesn't pay its own way, but councils spend money on assets that don't turn a profit all over the place. That wasn't the issue. The community thought we were closing it because it was costing too much. And I could quite easily articulate to those 250 people, we're closing it because you're not using it. And it changed the whole dynamic. It took about an hour and a half to get their head around it, and I just kept coming back to what they referred to as the blue line. And it was the chart that we were able to show them. I mentioned before our strategic plan. We're able to track by individual right down to a granular level, who's working on what status they're at, and it shows all sorts of clever metrics. What I will quickly do is show you the project one, if I can bring that up. My number one KPI 2 years in a row as CEO is to get on top of our capital projects. When I turned up, we were completing about 50% of those that we were budgeting to do. And it's taken a while to get our arms and legs around what was going on. So at the moment, we've got 1 month to run. The chart on the right-hand side, the little half donut up the top, we're 68% of the way into completing those projects. We've only spent 4.2 million out of the 9 million in the budget. So that's that lag, the financial lag I was talking about before. We can break this up by asset category, by all sorts of different things to analyse where work is and is not being performed. Not with the mindset of going out and cracking the whip and getting that team to work harder, because they're already working hard, right? What we want to do is make sure we're balancing our resources. And over the course of the last 3 years that we've been tracking this, I'm able to go back to the councillors and say, traditionally, we were able, with the humans we've got and the plant and equipment we've got, we were able to complete about $5 million worth of capital projects every year. Last year, you asked us to do 9 million. This year, again, you're asking us to do 9 million, right? We can't do it unless you resource up. So we're now going back to our asset management plans. right? With council's agreement, they've adopted them all. We're going to map all of our resource requirements against those plans and come back with recommendations to resource the council properly. Without this level of data and analysis supporting decisions like that, there's no way the elected members would approve that outcome. Right? So it's really, really important stuff. The last one I'll show you is when I turned up, I found out that we'd just installed GPS tracking systems into all of our plant and equipment. And we'd had about 12 months worth of data collected. And I asked that simple question, what are we doing with it? Oh, occasionally we'll get an alert that say that someone's been harsh braking or they've been cornering a little bit too fast or whatever it is, because the accelerometers measure all sorts of different things. And I said, what are you doing with that information? Oh, we promised the staff it wouldn't be used for punitive means. Okay. Why do we put them in then? It's about a $100,000 investment. Why did we put them in? So I started ferreting around, and just with the data we were able to download, put a very simple set of filters into Power BI and said if a grader is operating above 4 kilometres an hour and less than 12, so it's in that operating range where we expect the blades will be down, I want you to map it. So I can now see where our graders are operating, and every time we get complaints from the community that I never see graders in my ward, you just show them this, right? It takes the sting out of everything. The next step with this is we've partnered with Pinpoint to put the GPSs in, and I know there are some transport operators in this region that use the same system. We've been collaborating with them. We went back to Pinpoint and said, love all your speeding alerts, they actually don't add any productivity or value. How about you look at getting productivity data out of your system, you design it as a value add to your product. Because if I can increase the grading speed by 20%, so to go from 6 to 8 kilometres an hour through better training and standardisation of our operators, and we've got 4 graders in the fleet, I get another grader for free. For free. No more operators, no more graders, they're working the same number of hours, I get the equivalent of 1 grader for free. If then we can sequence our tasks, because our graders normally respond to complaints, and they'll go out and they'll grade a road and then they come back in and they'll go out and they'll grade another road. I said, if we can sequence those activities to reduce our transit time by 20%, guess what? I've got another grader for free. They're $300,000 a pop, right? Really, really simple answers that allow you to make really clever decisions with data that's already available, right? So I encourage you to be inquisitive. My inquisitive nature came from my Air Force days, right? I knew nothing about local government. With this sort of data, I'm learning really fast because I can measure, I can look, I can ask semi-intelligent questions, right? And I can probe and all those types of things. But unless you've got this information available and you're putting it in a format that's easy to digest and allow you to find those questions out of the data, then we may as well just go back to an analogue system. I'm done.